Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Amanda Langford. I'm the Director of Operations at Text for Text, and I just want to let you know a few things before we begin our webinar. If you are having trouble hearing through your computer speakers, you can always call into the webinar. So on the side here, if you could just click that little arrow next to the microphone and then choose Use Telephone, it should give you a number and a code to call in and join us through the webinar there. During our webinar, if you have any questions, feel free to type them right here in the chat box and hit send, and we will answer all questions at the end. And we are recording this webinar so that we will put it on our website after we are finished here. And so I will now turn it over to our Director of Research, April Wilson.
Thank you, Amanda. All right, so I am going to talk today about the need to increase our child abuse prevention services. Now, as a society, I think that we appreciate the importance of prevention services and plans with regard to our physical health. I mean, for example, we all know it's better to eat healthy foods and exercise rather than pay for treatment of heart disease or type 2 diabetes and other largely preventable illnesses, as well as, getting our immunizations and so forth. But in that same vein, it's equally important, if not even more important, that we stop child abuse before it occurs. Now, despite the importance of prevention, child abuse remains a pervasive problem in our state. So last year, there was an average of more than 176 children who were confirmed as abused every day. And this doesn't even include those children whose abuse went unreported. So the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services estimates that only half of child abuse is investigated. And really, it's difficult to prove abuse even when those investigations are undertaken. So these numbers truly underestimate the scope of the problem. And Texas also leads the nation in child abuse fatalities, with more than 4 children dying every week from abuse. And perhaps what's even worse about that statistic is that these deaths are largely avoidable. Now, this failure to adequately protect our children has lasting consequences for our kids. So, for example, you see that abused and neglected children are 85% more likely to suffer impaired brain development, or 66% more likely to be in treatment for drug abuse, or 28% more likely to be arrested, and so forth. In addition to that harm caused to our children, society and the government also pay a high price for this child abuse. There's a recent study by the Center for Disease Control, and researchers found that we will ultimately spend almost $1.3 million across a lifetime for every child that dies from abuse, and over $210,000 for an abused child who lives. Now, in Texas, the CPS, which of course we all know is the agency that's dedicated to protecting children from abuse from their parents or other close relatives, they spend significantly more money on the after effects of abuse than on preventing that abuse from happening in the first place. So as you can see from the first bar on this chart here, the overall CPS budget minus that funding for prevention is considerably more than what we spend on the prevention services. And here's our most recent biennial budget. Now, while stopping that current abuse and providing treatment to victimized children is an important goal in Texas, prevention still serves as the most logical and the most cost-effective way to protect children and to gain economic ground. Yet less than 5 children in Texas for every 1,000 receive prevention services, and compare that to a national average of almost 65 children. And so it's likely no coincidence that Texas has far more child abuse fatalities than the rest of the nation. Texas had more than 2,200 children die between 2001 and 2010, whereas the rest of the state's average at almost 260 child deaths from abuse during that same time period. So for this reason, we urge legislators to restore and expand funding for the OSPS Prevention and Early Intervention Division. Last session, the proposed cut for that PEI division was about 50%. Now, thanks to the amazing efforts of advocacy organizations such as those represented here today, we were able to keep those reductions to 30%. Nevertheless, we need to be expanding prevention services, not reducing it. So I'm saying notes about sound quality. Hopefully people can hear me. Now, the House has made some efforts to restore those prior funding cuts by adding $39.1 million back to PEI, which is on top of the base budget. And you can see the proposed additions and the breakdown by prevention service in this diagram. So we should all be supporting the appropriations proposed in the House for PEI. We also need to maintain and expand home visiting programs in Texas. Now, Text for Text does have a comprehensive report on home visiting services. Just briefly, home visiting programs serve as one of the most effective child abuse prevention and cost-saving strategies. These programs take a whole family or dual generation approach whereby personnel. Thus, we are urging members to support. Sorry, I'm reading messages at the same time, and I am trying to talk as loud as possible here, so hopefully people can hear me. So we're urging members to support Senate Bill 426, which provides the framework and the accountability system needed for effective home visiting programs using state dollars in Texas. We also need to maintain the current base budget funding of $17.8 million for the Nurse Family Partnership Program, which serves as a maintenance of effort used to leverage millions in federal funds for evidence-based home visiting programs. And finally, we hope to expand the home visiting programs to serve more families. And as you can see in this chart here, there is currently $7.9 million for proposed expansion of home visiting that has passed through the Senate. Thus, we want to support the Senate version of the home visiting expansion effort. So to just briefly recap, the advocacy prevention is the only way to get ahead of the excess spending problem on abuse services while also protecting our most vulnerable population. And we support the House efforts to restore and expand funding by $39.1 million for DFPS Prevention and Early Intervention Division. We also support Senate Bill 426 and the Senate's effort to increase the funding for home visiting programs. So thank you very much, and I hope that people were able to hear me. It sounds like we have some technical difficulties, but please let me know if you have any questions. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Ashley Harris, who is Policy Associate at Texas Services.
Good morning, afternoon. It's Madeline McClure. I'm not Ashley Harris. There was a little mix-up. Ashley will be doing the advocacy webinar tomorrow at the Capitol. I am the founding executive director of Text for Text, and I'm delighted to have everybody here today. Please let me know if you cannot hear me, and I'll be try to speak a little louder. So today I'm going to cover the Child Protective Service funding priorities. So what we really want to focus on today is what happens when we have a high caseworker turnover rate. A lot of folks ask me, well, you're helping CPS workers, but how about the kids? Well, certainly caseworker turnover does dramatically affect our children that are abused, and certainly in terms of permanency. This particular study showed that if a child has one caseworker during their entire time in care, they have over a 60% chance of reaching permanency within 1 year. As soon as that child's file is handed off to another worker or two workers, their chance of permanency reached within 1 year drops to just over 20%. And you can see from this slide what happens when that case is handed off between 3 or 4 workers. So caseworker turnover does have an impact on children, and unfortunately it has been rising since the bottom of the recession. So if you look at the far left slide, you'll see that all statewide employees in Texas have a turnover rate anywhere from 15, 17%, 13% over the last several years. However, when you look at the new Child Protective Service caseworkers, which do account for about 30% of our CPS workforce, their turnover is up at about 40%, and it dropped during the recession, but now it's creeping right back up at 38% currently. Our conservatorship caseworkers, their turnover did drop as we added more workers, again bottoming in the recession, but creeping up. And certainly we see that the same with our investigative caseworkers. What also happens with caseworker turnover is that it leads to less experienced caseworkers, less experienced caseworkers being promoted to supervisors. Less experienced supervisors is so negative for any unit, and it certainly impacts the quality of casework and ultimately the safety of CPS clients. One of the areas that impacts turnover directly is our caseloads. As you can see from caseworker reform days when we passed Senate Bill 6 in the 2005 legislative session, the caseloads have come down from those dramatic highs of 42. Actually, they were higher than that. And now we're at about 24.7 investigative caseloads cases per worker. Our family-based service caseworker caseloads have come down pretty dramatically as well, from 17.5 to just over 14. And the conservatorship caseloads have dropped, but certainly not as much as they need to. Keep in mind that the Child Welfare League of America recommends as an optimal, or actually just an adequate caseload of 12 for both investigative and family preservation caseloads, up to 15 for conservatorship. And we are well over that in the fiscal year 13 and 14, 15 projected. So what's the good news? Our new DFPS Commissioner, Judge John Specia, has made a very large request of the legislature to fund DFPS this session, and specifically is asking for $292 million more in funds of both general revenue and federal funds for the biennium. Now, that's a huge request. What the Senate has so far given in their approved budget is $229.5 million, or excuse me, $233 million in all funds, whereas the House, excuse me, that was the House budget, 233, and the House is at 206 million. What does this include? Maintaining the caseloads that we just saw, small improvement in statewide intake, which is going to reduce the abandonment rate from 35% to 30% of all calls. That's still much too high. Caseload growth for relative caregiver program, which allows our kinship providers to pay for daycare for the kids in their care. We also see a nice bump in caseload growth for foster and protective daycare. That's $12.2 million. That is in both budgets. Caseload growth for CPS purchase client services, another $11.3 million in both the Senate and House, and updates to the caseworker system applications, and that is $4 million in both chambers. So this is the great news. Finally, our collective continued call for investment in Child Protective Services has been heard and is being implemented. So that's a start, but is it sufficient? The answer is no. What we'd like for you to talk to your legislators about Friday, tomorrow, at Child Protection Day at the Capitol, is for these additional Child Protective Service funding. To number one, make sure that we really reduce our CPS caseworker turnover so that we can improve that continuity for the child. And number two, improve the safety of children by reducing the outstanding delinquent investigations. And three, keep children out of foster care and keep them with their caregivers that are relatives. We need to strengthen those kinship care services. And that's what I'm going to talk about in the next few slides. So Turnover is a part of several factors contribute to it. Caseloads, a stressful work environment, as well as inadequate supervision, not enough time to debrief or time off and on call. But one of the issues we find with our caseworkers is that they are forever continually saying they're dissatisfied with their pay. There is a small salary increase that is being proposed of $15.4 million that will increase the step ladder or career ladder pay from a 7 to 10% increase. And instead of doing that within 2 years, they're going to give those new workers an increase of 10% in 9 months. So that's one piece. And then additionally, to promote the interest in caseworkers becoming supervisors, where there's really not much of a salary differential, the legislature is adding $3.1 million more for supervisor pay. However, neither the Senate nor the House have added this $8.6 million general revenue that's needed for targeting the best, highest retention workers, and that is those with degrees in social work, counseling, early childhood education, psychology, criminal justice, secondary or elementary education, sociology, and human services. Actually, we passed this bill. Senator West carried this legislation for Tex Protects in the 80th session, or the 2007 legislative session, asking that the department target these particular degrees because we have found that folks with this kind of background have higher overall retention rates. They've been trained, they're educated, and understand what they're getting into, and they do have overall job satisfaction. But we can't exactly ask these folks to get into this field unless we pay them an adequate salary. The other way to reward our caseworkers is to compensate for on-call time. The staff is on call 24/7, and for those who are on call, over 650 workers at any given time, we need to at least give them an extra hour of pay for each hour on call during the work week. And we should give them 2 hours of pay during weekends and holiday. That would add $11.1 million in GR to the budget. Neither the House nor the Senate has funded that. And finally, a way to help workers is to support loan forgiveness. There's a $5,000 repayment proposal for each year that would apply to qualifying workers, and it's a maximum benefit of $20,000. So workers would be dedicated to the CPS staff position after they receive this kind of repayment, and we really do want to help them out getting their degrees. They're much better off if they have, especially a master's in social work. We have the highest retention of those workers, and we should support that. The other request into the legislature that the Senate is funding, but not the House fully, is to improve the safety of children by reducing delinquent investigations. Right now, there is a load of cases that have been open for more than 60 days. And that's not good for anybody, not the staff, not the children, not anybody, or the family. We need to close those cases and finish off what they started. So that will require additional investigative workers. The exceptional item for this is $50.1 million, and that would reduce the average caseload of investigators from 24.4 in 2013 to 16.3 in 2015. Now, the House has funded part of this, but the Senate is supporting the full request. Okay. And then finally, a very critical area is our kinship caregivers. We know that it is very difficult to raise children and it's very expensive too. Right now, we pay $22,776 for every child in foster care per year. That's about $1,900 a month. But for our kids in kinship care, they currently only get, the families only get $1,000 for an entire sibling group up front to buy bedding and food and school supplies, and then $500 per child per year, not per month, per year. So this proposal would increase the kinship support to $1,000 per child instead of $1,000 per sibling group. And if we did that plus the $500 per child, we're still talking about only $125 on average per month for kids in kinship care versus $1,898 per month for kids in foster care. And kids are, of course, better off being placed with family that they know and aren't strangers. It's just a better deal overall. The House has funded this request fully at $20.4 million. The Senate has skimped on it, so we're going with the House request here. In addition, our kinship caseworkers are carrying exorbitant caseloads. They're now at 49.7 cases per worker, and this line item also reduces their caseload to 30 per worker. So this is the final sum up page. So in addition to all the exceptional items that the Department of Family and Protective Services has requested, which has been agreed upon in both the House and the Senate, we especially support the following items by chamber and the additional funding as noted. So to sum up, number one, we want to improve that staff retention by funding the targeted degrees of $8.6 million general revenue and on-call pay of $11.1 general revenue, of $11.1 million. Secondly, we want to improve the safety for children. The number here in the slide is denotes the exceptional item number. And the request is $92.3 million of total safety line item in the Senate, and what we see is in the House is only 81.7. So we want the Senate's version of this line item. So we get those cases down. And that also that line item, that 92.3 million I should have added, does reduce conservative ship caseloads from 33 to 28.4 cases per worker. And then finally, and almost most importantly, is to keep children out of foster care by strengthening CPS kinship services and increasing the relative caregiver monetary assistance. Let's go with the House on this at $20.4 million versus the Senate's allocation of $12.5 million. Okay, and now it's my pleasure to turn this presentation over to Andrea Sparks, who is the government liaison and expert at Texas CASA.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I hope y'all can hear me. We are going to go really quickly through the basics of legislative advocacy. Usually I do this in about an hour or two, but I'm going to give you the skinny really quick. Because it's much simpler than you would think. I don't know who's on the phone. I can't actually see who's on the line, but I'm assuming that some of you have been to the Capitol before and some of you haven't. And some of you have never been to a legislative office before or had experience talking to the legislature about these issues. It's really simple and it's so, so important. So let's get started. Why are you here? Why are you here participating in this webinar? Why are you coming to Child Protection Day tomorrow? You are coming because the legislature needs to hear from you. If they don't hear from you, they're going to assume that everything is hunky-dory. It's a very reactive process in the legislature. You know, the legislature reacts to media stories. They react to kind of what's in the news. They react to their constituents' issues. Many of the bills we see filed that deal with CPS issues and child protection issues are actually constituent issues brought by the legislators' own constituents. So they need to hear from you, the experts in the field, the people who are actually on the ground doing this work and who care about kids, and they need to hear from you more than just tomorrow. I'm going to get to that in a second. If you don't speak up for our children this session, no one else will. It's so important that we speak up. There are, very well-paid, high-powered lobbyists all over the Capitol who, represent oil interests and transportation interests and water interests and medical interests and all other kinds of business interests. And our kids, as you know, can't afford those lobbyists and also can't come to the Capitol themselves. So it's really up to us to speak up for them. Why are we here? We are here because our system, as you all know very well, is at best a safety net in Texas. And we need to do better for our children and families. And the only way to do that, again, is to let the legislature know what it's really like out there. They pass laws and budgets that basically create the system, and they're going to assume everything is fine unless they hear from us. We want not only to bring awareness about what's really going on and what the challenges are, but also we want to give them a sense of urgency about these issues, because this is not just another issue that's about money or that's about, someone paying too much taxes or even the drought. I would argue that this is even more important than the water issues that our state is facing, because these kids are growing up now and they can't wait for us to get it right. They want us to get it right now. And these kids are our future, as you know. And we also want the legislature to really look at child protection issues as a priority. And that's really the hard part. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. We do have some champions in the legislature, some of whom are going to be speaking tomorrow at the rally, and I hope you all are coming. But we need a lot more champions to champion our children. I know what you're thinking. I know you're thinking, oh, our legislator supports us. They support our Child Welfare Board, or they support our CASA program, or they're really on board with Text Protect. Yes, they probably do. I would venture to say that there is not one legislator in the Capitol who would say, oh no, I'm not a fan of CASA. I'm not a fan of Text Protect. But we need much more than that. We need a commitment. So what are we trying to do here? We're trying to move the legislature from being aware of the issues and maybe supporting some of the issues to actually believing in the cause, to actually understanding it enough and educating them enough in what we're talking about to becoming a champion for our cause. Because I'll tell you, there are competing interests, again, big lobbyists, big money, and not a lot of money in this state spent. We don't have a state income tax. We don't have other funds that would be available that other states have and spend on their child welfare system. So we really need those champions in the legislature. And the only way to do that is not just to come to Child Protection Day tomorrow, but to keep up your advocacy efforts and to basically, it's all about relationships and develop relationships with your legislators. So we want the kinds of champions who are not only willing to come and speak at our rally or to come to your local events. We want the kinds of champions who are willing to trade votes in the back room. If each legislature gets 2 priorities funded a session, we want to be one of those priorities for as many legislators as we can. That's the kind of champions we need. So I'm having to text when I want the page turned. This is why I'm having to stop. I apologize. Okay, so how do we do that? Surprise, surprise, it's all about relationships. You want to establish yourself tomorrow as a resource for your legislators, as someone they trust, as someone they connect with. You want to continue doing that throughout session, and I would argue it's even more important during the interim when they're home and you can visit them in the district and they have more time. You want to support them. You want to be consistent. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So Child Protection Day is going to be a great event, and we're really going to raise awareness that, you know, these are important issues and that we all care about them. But I urge you to continue the fight and to continue building those relationships after tomorrow. I cannot tell you how important that is. If you just come to the Capitol once a year and do nothing else, it's going to be really hard for us to get those champions we need. I also want to tell you that, you know, there are a lot of, well, I wouldn't say a lot, there are a handful of experts at this in the Capitol. You just heard from one of them who's very well respected, Madeline McClure. She knows all the stats, she knows all the numbers, and I'm here to tell you today that y'all don't need to know all that. You do not need to know all that when you walk into your legislative office. It's great to have her as a resource and to be able to, you know, maybe then print out that last slide that she showed that shows the differences between the House and Senate versions of the budget and what they're funding for CPS. But if you start talking to them about all these numbers, you're going to get confused. One, you're going to get intimidated because you don't know all these numbers as well as Madeline does. And frankly, your strength as grassroots advocates is to tell your story. The legislators are so busy right now. They're actually debating, the House is, the budget today and probably tomorrow. And it's really a crazy time. So what you need to do is grab their attention. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But I want everyone to realize that if you haven't been to the Capitol before, you're going to walk in there and walk into your legislators' offices and you're going to go, my gosh, this place is run by a bunch of 25-year-olds. And really, it kind of is. We have a lot of young but really smart and influential staff in the legislature. And so you might not get to see your legislator, and I don't want you to be disappointed by that. I want you to take this as an opportunity to start developing relationships with those critical staff members who really do have a lot of influence on how their bosses vote, on what their bosses pay attention to. I'll give you a good example. A couple of years ago, we were working with a fairly new legislator and his staff, and I never could get access to this legislator himself, but his staff, and just building that relationship with his receptionist, she said, you know, I put his mail on his desk every morning, and I always put CASA stuff on top. That is huge. That is power right there. So don't underestimate your relationships with the staff in the office. And I have to say, you know, don't underestimate the power of just showing up. When we do CASA Day at the Capitol, we'll have, you know, over 300 people at the Capitol, and not everybody gets to talk to their legislator. Not everybody gets to tell their story. But just having that many people show up makes a huge impact. Just showing up is going to make a difference for us tomorrow, for all of us and all of our kids. And have fun. Wear comfortable shoes, wear blue, celebrate the work that you're doing to make children safer and to help them, you know, thrive in Texas. Before you go into your visits at you want to decide who is going to be the main spokesperson. If you're with a group of people, it's really important just to say, okay, I'm going to talk about this, you talk about that, and really just kind of, you know, organize your time that way because, as I said, time is short. These staff members are really busy. Your legislators, if you get a chance to meet with them, you might get 5 to 10 minutes max. So you really want to think about what you're going to say before you go in and who's going to say it. You're not going to all be able to talk. And again, I think the more the merrier. I think it's more effective when a lot of people walk into an office. It might not be the staff's best day. You know, they don't like to be bombarded, but that's okay. It gets their attention, and this is not about what they like. This is about bringing awareness and urgency to our cause. So decide who'll be the main spokesperson. Ensure that everyone, especially if you're constituents of the legislature, of the legislative office that you're visiting, that you get to introduce yourself and say where you're from. It makes a huge difference to talk to a legislative office if you're from the district, and you would be so surprised about the little connections you can make with legislative staffers and the member themselves based on, you know, their son playing on the soccer team that your son plays on, or, you know, oh, my grandma used to live on that street. And those are the things that will connect you to the office, and you'll be able to build on those in building a relationship with the legislative office. And then decide on which story you're going to tell and who's going to tell it before you walk in. So let's talk about stories real quick. This to me is so critical. Like I said, there are experts in and around the Capitol who know the numbers, who know the stats, who know exactly which bill and which committee substitute to vote for, who know all of those things. And what we're asking you is not to be experts in all of those things. You have resources in your membership associations and in the handouts you're going to have, and frankly at the legislative staffer briefing tomorrow afternoon. What you need to do is get the legislative office you're visiting emotionally committed to the cause. So I'm urging you to think of a story, think of a case example that you've seen on the ground in the district that brings home the message that we need improvements in our child protection system. And we are meeting the challenges, but we need your help. You don't want to be so glum. You want to be positive, but you want to tell the truth. And so I don't know if y'all can see this picture on the slide, but this is a story that one of our advocates told of this little boy who came into foster care and was so over-medicated and so afraid and traumatized by his experience in foster care and in RTCs that he would go sit in a corner and look at the walls voluntarily because that was the only way he felt safe. You want to tell a story that paints a picture like that. You want to tell your story about what's happening in a particular child's case or what's happening in your county with prevention dollars and how we need to increase those. Tell stories that connect to the legislative agenda and that connect to you, that you can tell. Tell the stories that you know because they will see that you are passionate about those. They will understand that this is an emotional thing for you. And this is probably the hardest thing to do. It's going to be really, really tempting just to make small talk and not get into your story. But we tell our CASA advocates all the time, the story is our pot of gold. We have those stories from what's really happening on the ground, and that is the stuff that the legislature will not forget. They'll forget the numbers, they'll forget the statistics. They will not forget the story of this kid sitting in the corner because he's so afraid to look around him. So I urge you to do that. You don't want to badmouth anybody in your story. You don't want to talk about a certain group of people in the child protection system. We are all here together on Child Protection Day. It's one of the great things about it, to make our system stronger together. We're all in this together. Attorneys, CPS, CASA, child welfare boards, advocates, social workers, therapists, youth, everybody is in this together, and we all have to be accountable for what our system looks like. So let's talk about the logistics of your actual visit. You are, going to have your plan of what you're going to say when you walk in. You're going to have your spokesperson. You're going to have your story ready to go. When you walk in, don't forget to sign the guest book. That is so important because you will be on their mailing list and you will be able to track what that legislator is doing, and this is part of building the relationship. You want to keep in touch with them. You want them to know that you're from their district. You want to say hello to everyone and introduce yourself to everyone in these offices. It's a really small world, and like I said, you will make connections to staff that will be very, very valuable to you in developing these relationships. You might see, young staff and think, wow, they're not going to have any power, they're not going to have any influence, and you would be wrong if you thought that. Don't assume that they know what your organization does. You could, I say this all the time, our CASA programs think, oh, yeah, we're with CASA, and the legislature goes, oh, yeah, we love CASA. That legislator probably doesn't really understand what CASA does. So you want to be respectful, but you want to say, as you know, CASA volunteers are trained and then sworn in by the court to represent the best interests of one child or set of siblings in the foster care system. Or, as you know, child welfare boards are made up of community volunteers in each county, and really explain it, because they have no idea. They'll act like they know because that's their job, but they really don't know. You don't want to talk over their social cues. You know, like they're going to be, if you're going over and you're talking too much, watch their faces. You're going to be able to see it, but you really need, again, to tell that story, to give real life examples, even if it's uncomfortable. Because I'm telling you, they have people coming in and out of their office all day long who do not do that, and it's like a blur to them. If you tell your story and make your visit memorable, it might be the one thing that they remember this week. It might be the one thing they needed to get their boss to vote favorably on CPS's exceptional items. It might be the one thing you needed when you called back and asked them to vote favorably on a bill or to kill a bad bill. So please, please, please give them real life examples of what's going on in the district. Take photos of your visit, put them on your Facebook page, send them to the legislator to put on their Facebook pages. Get them developed and send them to the office and ask him to sign them, you know, autograph them and give them back to you. They love that stuff. Legislators love feeling important, and even their staff too. And then, you know, invite them to get more engaged in the community. Maybe after session, they can, you know, come to visit your office or see what a child welfare board meeting is like, or, you know, go to court and actually see what happens in these cases. You also want to please invite them to the rally at noon on the South Steps, and invite them to the legislative staffer briefing in the afternoon. That's going to be really important, where we're going to go over the legislation in more depth, and we're going to have handouts with the bills that we want them to support. Then when you're closing your visit, after, you know, telling your story, meeting everybody, inviting them to do more in the district and coming to the briefing that afternoon, you want to say, can we count on your support? Can we count on your support for our agenda this session? If you don't say that, then you're not doing what you were there to do, you know, and they'll have to answer you. They'll have to answer you if you ask them that question. And then you want to say, how can we be a resource to you going forward on these issues? You know, please call us anytime you have any questions about child protection legislation. Because guess what? We don't want them making this up. We want them calling you and asking your opinion on these things. That's the only way we're going to get a truly informed child protection system. And then you want to ask, you know, how can we stay in touch? And again, invite them to the events in the afternoon. After you get home from your visits, after your visit, send them a thank you note. Handwritten is always the best, a handwritten thank you note. Send them the photos. Keep in touch with them, sign up for their newsletters, you know, like them on Facebook, and then sign up for updates through your organization, through Text Protect, through Texas CASA. We have a Capital Beat that goes out. Texans Care has a listserv and a subscription service to their alerts. There's a lot going on at the Capitol, and you would be amazed if you knew how scary it is sometimes with some of these bills that are. So you really need to stay abreast of those stay in touch. And that's all I have. I just want to thank everybody for coming and listening to me.
Well, thank you, Andrea. That was a fantastic advocacy presentation. And I want to second your motion in terms of the message. You're right. I tend to get into the weed and the statistics and the facts. But I think it's really important to emphasize what you said. You really don't need to have all the numbers at your fingertips. I think to make the message really clear, number one, I would go in there and thank the legislator for their support of the new Child Protective Service budget that's being proposed. It's quite a bit of money, at least over $200-some million. So that's, you know, it's fine they're taking a big next step. However, let's just keep in mind, it won't solve the CPS programs overnight. But I think our big message has got to be to invest in the front end in prevention. And if we don't, we're going to have more innocent children scarred for life flowing into the CPS system. So that's where we need to shore up. And I think it's really interesting when you look at the data, just one bit of data here. Our child population in Texas has grown by over 1 million kids in the last 10 years, some 18%. However, our child abuse prevention programs under PEI have dropped by 32% over that same time frame. So our child population increased 18% over 10 years, and over 10 years, our prevention funding dropped 32%. So if that's the one statistic you're going to remember, that you're going to use, that's the one to remember. So again, thank you so much, Andrea, and we'll open it up for questions now.
So if anyone does have any questions, you could go ahead and type it in the chat box, and we'll get that answered.
It looks like we've got some questions coming in. So the question is, will there be packets of info available with the legislators? Absolutely. So tomorrow during Advocacy Day at the Capitol, the briefing in the morning, we'll be giving out packets. Really, they're just a few pages, leave behind, and we'll certainly be reviewing the highlights of this presentation in the morning. So yes, you'll be prepared to leave some literature behind. Are there any other questions that anybody you would like to type in the chat box? Looks like a question is coming. That's a really good question, Sherry. Can we use a fact key sheet? You know, we didn't plan on bringing that, but that's an excellent idea. I do have a fact sheet. I think that's an excellent point about the number of kids in the system and so forth, and a little more about the budget. We could do that. I think that's an excellent suggestion. Thank you. We'll get on that. Any other suggestions?
Okay, well, we will have a recording of this available on YouTube, and we'll have the link to that on our website. So, thank you all for joining us, and have a great afternoon.